Hi, Honest Discussioner here. I didn't even want to make a video tonight. I've been neglecting my work. But after hearing Veritas' latest video, I felt compelled to weigh in on this. In his video, Veritas makes the argument that morality cannot come from the natural world, as the natural world is what it is and has no ought, which Veritas mentions is what consists of morality, such as you ought not murder. And basically, ought refers to the way something should be, or how someone should behave, but in a naturalistic universe, according to Veritas, there is none of this. There is only what is. Now, Veritas claims that in order for there to be an ought, there must be a design or a designer. He gives the analogy that if one claims one's brakes are not functioning like they ought to, then that implies that there's something about the design of said brakes that is not being fulfilled. No, of course there's no design in the natural universe, or at least that's what I believe. But Veritas claims that I cannot really contend that. I cannot contend that there's no design in the natural universe and still hold that there is such a thing as morality. As we said before, the universe is just how it is, and you can't really say it ought to be a certain way. Now, I feel as though when I have this discussion on morality with Christians and theists, they seem perplexed at the idea of there being morality without some overarching judge. Perhaps they don't feel as comfortable as they normally do, without there being a certainty to morality that would possibly exist in the God scenario. But as I'll demonstrate later, the morality of the God scenario is either not morality as we know it to be, or is the type of morality that could exist in the natural world without God. But first, let's address Veritas' issues. For the sake of argument, let's say there is no personal God that is aware of our existence. How can morality still work? Now, firstly, I reject the notion that ought implies a deviation from design, but rather a deviation from how we expect something to be. In this godless universe, when something deviates from an expected pattern, even if there's a perfectly rational explanation for why said thing deviates from that pattern, we would still say it ought not be behaving in this new and unfamiliar pattern. If Old Faithful were to suddenly not erupt one day, we would say it ought to be erupting, because we expect it to. I think it erupts like clockwork, at like 3 o'clock or 3:15 every day, something along those lines. If that were to stop happening, even though there's technically not necessarily a design there, we would still say it ought to be because we expect it to be. Now, how does this apply to morality? Obviously, whether a geyser erupts has nothing to do with morality, but what does? Well, to understand that we have to understand our origins, meaning, of course, evolution. Now, we evolved a sense of morality through first evolving behaviors that were beneficial to us. Now, when we evolved a sense of rationality, we recognized these patterns of beneficial behaviors as normal, and more importantly, recognized deviations from this expected pattern as not normal, thus morality. Now, we're at a higher state than we were before, since we could only recognize normal behaviors, and now we actually understand the mechanisms behind these actions through psychology and other various disciplines. Now, we can actually study what is beneficial for our species and promote that. See, when we think about morality, that is basically what we think of, what is good for us. At least those of the higher sense of morality do that. The less intelligent blindly follow most social norms as good because that's what they've been taught and don't think too deeply into it. I'm not accusing Veritas of this, by the way. Now, there are two types of possible realities as far as morality goes under the God scenario, and neither are superior to the secular morality I just discussed. These two types are on either side of what's known as the Eupithro dilemma. The Eupithro dilemma, as I understand it, discusses whether God is just pure and good and therefore, combined with omniscience, has perfect morality, or whether might makes right. Whatever God says is moral, in other words. If God designed us to be harmful to one another, then it would technically be moral to be harmful, and likewise immoral to be helpful to others. Now, I don't know if he'd admit this, but according to the video, Veritas would technically fall on the latter, as ought to is indicative of our design, and God could choose to design us to rape women, and therefore it would be moral to do so, upon his design and commandment as such. Now, the latter basically reduces morality to nothing more than God's pet peeves, and does not match what we normally consider to be morality. Perhaps one might argue that it would be in your best interest to follow God, even if he commands harmful things, for he'll smite you otherwise. And while you'll probably be correct, you cannot really call God good under this scenario, because the very definition of the word describes something beneficial and not harmful. Now, if you're going to go with the former, based on previous Veritas videos and even parts of this one, I'd say he'd technically go with the former. But if you're going to do this, then you're declaring that within the universe there is a reason that one action is moral. Either God designed us or he didn't, but whichever reality is the case, we are still what we are. If you hold the view that morality exists because of God, and there is a reason beyond his personal preferences that he commands as he does, then it is indeed good for us to behave in this fashion, and he knows it is, and that's why he commands it to be. But then this morality is one that does operate within the natural universe and can still exist without God. We might just have a more difficult time understanding it. Now, one last thing the Veritas does is declare that certain states of mind are more rational than others. I don't necessarily reject the premise so much as the wording. Perhaps in philosophy, states of mind mean something different than I believe them to be, but it would seem to me that what Veritas is describing is more accurately called beliefs than state of mind, to me at least. Believing that there is a phone in front of me is a belief, not a state of mind. There are more rational states of mind than others, but from my view, those are more indicative to how the brain is functioning at the moment, whether it is blinded by rage or there are other chemicals, either natural or otherwise, interfering with its functioning, and whether one's emotional state is interfering with their current thought process. Now, I can hold an irrational belief, but still be in a rational state of mind. Perhaps everything else I believe at the moment is quite rational. Likewise, a crazy person could still claim the sky is blue, and though their state of mind is not very rational, their belief in the sky being blue was. No real point to be made here, but I thought I'd mention this, as I feel as though I might be not understanding where Veritas was necessarily going with the whole state of mind. This is really just a definitional thing, I think, here. But that's about it. Have a nice day. Honest Discussioner, out.